You replayed the conversation 3 times, not to understand it, not to process it, to find the moment where you should have said something different, something sharper, something that would have made them pause. Instead of you went over it in the shower, on the drive home, in that half-asleep space at 11 at night when your mind should have been quiet. You rehearsed better versions of yourself, better lines, a calmer tone, a more precise explanation of why they were wrong. And the strangest part is this: none of those rehearsals ever made you feel better. None of them. Because somewhere beneath the replay, you already knew the problem was not your choice of words. The problem was what you believed those words were supposed to fix. Here is what Stoics understood that most people spend decades learning the hard way. You cannot talk your way into someone's respect. You cannot explain your way there. You cannot demonstrate it clearly enough that they finally get it and hand it back to you. Respect is not a conclusion someone reaches after hearing enough evidence. It is a signal they receive from you before you say a single word. What you are about to understand is not a technique. It is not a strategy for handling difficult people. It is something quieter than that. It is the one thing you build inside yourself. And once it is built, the whole game changes. Not because the world becomes kinder, because you become harder to shake. There is a conversation you keep having. Different rooms, different people, sometimes even different years. But the feeling at the end is always the same. You walked away feeling smaller than when you walked in. Maybe someone spoke over you while you were mid-sentence and kept going, like you had not even made a sound. Maybe a comment landed in front of other people, not cruel enough to call out directly, but precise enough that you felt its edges for hours afterward. Maybe you expressed something that mattered to you, and the response was a half-distracted nod. And you realized in that moment that your words had not landed anywhere at all. You did not fire back. You measured your response. You chose patience, or silence, or a careful explanation of how you felt. All the things you have been told are the mature, reasonable way to handle it. And it happened again. That is the part that wears at you. Not just the moment itself, but the pattern, the repetition, the sense that something you are doing is not working, but you cannot quite identify what it is. Epictetus spent the first half of his life as a slave in Rome, not a servant, a slave, which meant his body was someone else's property. His freedom of movement, his daily existence, the conditions of his survival, all of it governed by another person's decisions. He had every reason to believe his inner life was as exposed and controlled as his outer one. But he did not. He wrote, and his students recorded, that there is a place inside you where no one is allowed without your permission, a territory that cannot be claimed by force or by words. He called it your capacity for judgment, your ability to decide what things mean and what they do not. He was not writing about a coping mechanism. He was writing about the architecture of a free person. What he understood, from a position most of us will never experience, was that the feeling of being diminished does not come from the outside in. It travels the other direction. The sting you feel when someone dismisses you does not live in their words. It lives in the part of you that needed their words to go differently. That is not a character flaw. That is just how it works when you have not yet built the one thing that changes it. Think about the last time a comment really landed. Not a surface-level annoyance, not the kind that fades by the next morning, but the kind that stayed. The kind that came back to you 3 days later, when you were doing something completely unrelated. Ask yourself honestly, what was the comment actually touching? not the surface of it, the thing underneath, the part of you that already wondered whether it might be true. That is what Epictetus was pointing at. When someone's words find that place, they are not discovering something new about you. They are finding something you left unguarded, a doubt you have been carrying quietly, not in a way you would say out loud, but it is there, in the way you hesitate sometimes before you speak, the way you watch for reactions after you say something, the way you feel the need to qualify and explain and soften, as if your ideas are always potentially too much, or not quite enough. You have been doing that so long. You have probably forgotten there was ever a version of you that did not. And that is precisely where the leverage lives. Not in the other person's sharpness or cruelty. In the gap between what you know about yourself and what you have actually settled. When that gap exists, other people can step into it. Not always intentionally. Sometimes just by existing in a way that presses on the edges. The real work is not learning how to respond to them. The real work is closing the gap. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the known world. He commanded armies, governed millions, held more authority than nearly any human being in recorded history. And every morning, before the rest of Rome was awake, he sat alone and wrote to himself, not to record victories, not to instruct others, to remind himself of things he already knew, but needed to keep knowing. He wrote down the obvious. He repeated himself. He circled back to the same principles over and over in different words, because he understood something important. Knowing something and having built it into your character are not the same thing. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He was not writing that for philosophy students. He was writing it because being the most powerful man in the world did not protect him from the pull of resentment, from the temptation to take the disrespect of others personally, from the instinct to defend himself when he felt wronged. He had all the external power that exists, and he still had to sit down every morning and rebuild the internal kind. That is the thing most people misunderstand about Stoic discipline. It is not a state you arrive at. It is not a realization you have once that rewires everything from that moment forward. It is a practice, a daily return to the same ground. The one thing you build is not built in a single moment. It is built in the accumulation of small choices, each one almost too minor to notice. The moment you do not rush to defend yourself when you could have. The moment you let something pass without explaining why it should not have been said. The moment you feel the pull of the familiar reaction and choose something quieter instead. Each of those moments is a repetition, and repetitions build the structure of who you are. Not who you intend to be, who you actually are. There is a specific experience that almost everyone in a pattern like this has had. You decide to change something. You stop over-explaining. You stop absorbing every comment without question. You hold steadier than you used to. And things get worse before they get better. The other person pushes harder. The words get sharper. They seem frustrated, or confused, or somehow more insistent, as if your steadiness is a provocation rather than a resolution. This is the moment most people conclude they made a mistake. They think their calm response damaged something. They go back to the old pattern, because it at least produces a recognizable result. But that escalation is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is working. Think about pressing a button that is always lit up, every single time, without fail. Then, one day, you press it, and nothing happens. You do not immediately assume the button is broken. You press it again, then again, more deliberately. The absence of the expected result is disorienting, and the instinct is to push harder until the familiar pattern resumes. That is what is happening. The interaction has been operating on a system. You provided predictable responses. The other person learned that system. When you change your response, the system breaks, and broken systems protest before they adapt. Seneca spent years in the most dangerous court in Rome. He navigated an emperor who executed people for entertainment. He was surrounded by men who had mastered the art of wielding words like instruments of control. He survived it, many times, and he wrote about it with the clarity of someone who had been tested. He wrote, "Whoever angers you, conquers you." He meant it practically, not as philosophy. The moment you react from emotion, you hand over the decision-making. You are no longer choosing your response. You are being chosen by your reaction. And a response that can be predicted can be used. Remaining steady during the escalation is not about being cold. It is not about shutting down. It is about staying in the position where the decisions belong to you. You feel the pressure rise. You notice the pull toward the old pattern. You choose differently anyway. Not dramatically, not with a speech, just differently. That choice, repeated, is the one thing. There is a version of strength that looks like composure, and people assume it is natural. They see someone who does not flinch when a comment lands, someone who responds to pressure without visible disturbance, and they think that person was simply born less reactive, wired differently. But composure is not a trait. It is infrastructure. It is what you have when the inside of you is settled enough that the outside of you does not need to prove anything. And it shows in the smallest things, not in how you handle the biggest confrontations. The small ones, the way you move through ordinary moments, whether you qualify every opinion before you voice it, whether you read a room for approval before you decide how to present yourself, whether your comfort in any given space depends on how the people around you seem to be receiving you. You know what this feels like. The person who has built the internal foundation does not walk into a room and scan it. They walk in, demand, and simply exist in it. Not because they are arrogant, not because they have decided other people do not matter, but because their sense of themselves is not contingent on what the room decides to give back. That is what you are building. Not armor, not distance, a ground. From that ground, something practical changes. When someone makes a cutting remark, you do not need to immediately assess whether it contains truth. You can hold it at a small distance, examine it without urgency, and decide what it actually deserves. If it contains something worth considering, you take that and release the rest. If it contains nothing, you let it pass. Without it needing to become a whole event, you are not suppressing anything. You are choosing what gets in. There is a conversation coming. You do not know when. You do not know exactly who it will involve. But there will be a moment. Probably soon. Probably ordinary looking. Probably not particularly dramatic on the surface, where the old pull will be there. The impulse to explain yourself, to prove something, to make sure they understand you correctly, to need the exchange to end in a particular way. And you will feel it clearly, because you can already feel it now. That is the moment, not the big ones, not the confrontations you can prepare for. The quiet, unremarkable moment where you feel the old pattern rise, and you recognize what it actually is. The gap. Asking to be filled by someone else's words instead of your own certainty. You do not have to close that gap all at once. You do not have to have resolved every doubt, healed every old wound, answered every quiet fear you carry. You just have to make a different choice in that moment, one that comes from something more solid than the need for their reaction to go a certain way. Marcus Aurelius understood that the work is never finished. He kept writing the same reminders to himself for years, because the human mind does not simply decide to be steady and then stay that way. It requires return. It requires practice. It requires the willingness to keep choosing the ground, even when the pull towards something louder is strong. That is not weakness. That is how it actually works. There is a conversation that happened, one you have already turned over more times than you would like to admit. And there is a version of you that will keep turning it over, looking for the right words you should have said. Let it be what it was. The conversation you are building toward is the one that has not happened yet. The one where you walk in already settled, not performing steadiness, not deciding in advance how to handle every possible response, simply not needing the exchange to go a certain way in order for you to be okay. That is different from resignation. That is different from not caring. That is what it feels like when the ground has been built. You do not announce it. You do not explain that you have changed. You simply show up differently, and the interaction reflects it back. Not because the other person suddenly becomes who you needed them to be, because you stopped requiring that. The work that makes this happen is quieter than most people expect. It is not a confrontation or a declaration. It is the accumulation of moments where you chose the solid thing over the reactive one, where you let the need for validation pass through without feeding it, where you stayed in your own judgment instead of outsourcing it. One choice, then another, then the next one. That is the once, not a single dramatic moment, but the decision to keep returning to this ground until returning here becomes the thing you do naturally. The conversation is waiting.